My hands were trembling as I lifted the velvet box from its hiding place. It was tucked behind his winter boots in the back corner of the closet, deliberately concealed like something stolen. I wasn't snooping, not really. I just needed to grab his jacket because the temperature had dropped outside, but this was something entirely different. Before opening it, I held my breath, my heart already racing with a premonition I couldn't name. Then I saw it. A platinum bracelet studded with tiny emeralds that caught the dim closet light. Beautiful, expensive, and attached to it was a small white tag with handwriting I recognized instantly. To Henry, with all my heart. The air left my lungs. Henry? Who was Henry? Dennis, my boyfriend of 3 years, was still in the living room working on his laptop, completely unaware that I'd just stumbled onto something that made my entire world tilt sideways. 3 years we'd been together, and I'd never once heard the name Henry. Not in passing, not in old stories, not even as a casual mention of a friend or colleague. I read the tag again, hoping somehow the letters would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. The D stood for Dennis. That much was obvious. So this gift was from him. But why was it hidden? Why had he never mentioned it? And why did the message sound so achingly intimate? My mind raced through possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Maybe it was an old gift he'd never given away. Maybe Henry was just a friend. But friends don't get platinum bracelets with emeralds. Friends don't get notes that say "with all my heart." I carefully placed the box back exactly where I'd found it, making sure the boots covered it the same way. My legs felt unsteady as I walked toward the living room. Dennis looked up when he heard me approach, and his face broke into that smile, the one that had made me fall in love with him 3 years ago. Warm, genuine, loving. "Hey babe, did you find the jacket?" he asked, his voice light and casual. I nodded, unable to trust my voice just yet. Inside, a storm was building: doubt, fear, and something sharper that felt like betrayal, even though I didn't yet know if I had the right to feel betrayed. Who was Henry? And why did Dennis still have that gift hidden away like a secret he wasn't ready to let go of? That night, sleep was impossible. I lay beside Dennis in our bed, feeling the weight of his arm draped across my waist, listening to his steady breathing. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal. But underneath it all, something had shifted. I kept seeing that bracelet, kept reading those words over and over in my mind. With all my heart. Those were words you said to someone you loved. Someone who mattered. And here I was, lying next to him, wondering if I'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion this entire time. The bedroom was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight coming through the curtains. I turned my head to look at Dennis's face, peaceful in sleep, and felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to shake him awake and demand answers. Part of me was terrified of what those answers might be. What if Henry was someone from his past who still held a piece of his heart? What if I'd been nothing more than a distraction? A way to fill the space left by someone he'd never truly gotten over. I thought about our relationship, examining it with fresh eyes, looking for cracks I might have missed. The way he sometimes got distant when certain songs played. The times his phone would buzz and he'd glance at it with an expression I couldn't quite read before putting it away without comment. Were those moments connected to Henry? Or was I letting paranoia twist innocent things into evidence of betrayal? Around 4 in the morning, I made a decision. I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen that gift. I couldn't go on acting like everything was fine when my mind was screaming with questions. I needed to know who Henry was. I needed to understand why Dennis had hidden that bracelet. And if that meant doing some digging, crossing some lines I'd never thought I'd cross, then so be it. Because the alternative, living in this state of uncertainty, this limbo of not knowing, felt infinitely worse than whatever truth I might uncover. I carefully extracted myself from Dennis's embrace and went to the bathroom, closing the door softly behind me. In the mirror, I looked exhausted, my eyes red-rimmed and haunted. I splashed cold water on my face and gripped the edges of the sink, staring at my reflection. This person looking back at me, was he someone worth fighting for in Dennis's eyes? Or had there always been someone else occupying that space in his heart? When I finally crawled back into bed, Dennis stirred slightly, pulling me closer in his sleep. The gesture, which would have comforted me yesterday, now felt almost cruel in its tenderness. How could he hold me like this if his heart was somewhere else? How could he smile at me with such apparent love if I was just a substitute for the person he really wanted? The first light of dawn was creeping through the curtains when I made my second decision of the night. Tomorrow, when Dennis left for work, I would start searching. I would find out who Henry Crawford was, because somehow I knew that was his full name, felt it in my bones. I would piece together the story that Dennis had kept hidden from me, and then I would decide what to do with that information. But even as I made these plans, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Some truths, once known, change everything forever. Was I really ready for that? Was I prepared to potentially lose the relationship I'd built my entire adult life around? I looked at Dennis one more time, memorizing the peaceful expression on his face, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the slight curve of his lips that suggested he was having a pleasant dream. This might be one of the last moments I'd have of seeing him like this, before everything became complicated, before accusations and explanations and possibly heartbreak. Part of me wanted to preserve this moment, to pretend I'd never found that box, to go on living in blissful ignorance. But I couldn't. The truth has a weight to it, and once you know it exists, you can't unknow it. The gift was there. The name was there. And somewhere in Dennis's past, or maybe his present, Henry existed, and I needed to know why. The moment Dennis's car pulled out of the driveway the next morning, I was at his laptop. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened the screen, feeling like an intruder in my own home. This was wrong. I knew it was wrong. Our relationship had been built on trust, and here I was, about to violate that trust in the most fundamental way. But the image of that bracelet, that tag, those words, they haunted me, gave me permission to cross lines I'd never imagined crossing. His social media was easy to access since we'd always been open with each other. Or at least, I'd thought we'd been open. I scrolled through his recent posts first. Pictures of us at restaurants, weekend hikes, casual selfies with captions about how lucky he was. Everything looked picture perfect, the kind of relationship that makes other people envious. But now, looking at these images with new eyes, I wondered if they were real or just a performance, a way to convince the world and maybe himself that he'd moved on from whoever Henry was. I went further back, scrolling through 2 years of posts, then 3. Nothing unusual. Work updates, friend gatherings, family events. Dennis's digital life seemed utterly ordinary, but I remembered reading once that people often archive the things they want to hide but can't bring themselves to delete. So I looked for the archived messages, the conversations he'd tucked away but hadn't destroyed. That's when I found him. Henry Crawford. The name appeared again and again in messages from 4 years ago, before Dennis and I had even met. I clicked on the first conversation with shaking hands, and immediately wished I hadn't. The messages were intimate in a way that made my chest tighten. They talked about future plans, about moving in together, about building a life. There were inside jokes I didn't understand, references to places they'd been together, pet names that made me feel like I was reading someone's private diary. Then I found the message that stopped my breath. "I'll never forget you, Den. You were everything." The phone slipped from my hands and clattered onto the desk. I sat there staring at nothing, my mind trying to process what I'd just read. Everything. Henry had called Dennis everything, and based on the timestamp, this message had been sent after their breakup. A final goodbye that felt anything but final. I forced myself to keep reading, to understand the full story. Apparently they'd been together for 2 years before Henry had to move across the country for a job opportunity. They'd tried long distance for a while, but it hadn't worked. The breakup seemed mutual, sad but necessary. The last messages were full of maybe someday and if timing had been different. But that was 4 years ago. Ancient history, right? Except the bracelet was new. The box had been pristine, no dust, no age, which meant Dennis had purchased it recently. For Henry. But why? I navigated to Dennis's calendar, another violation of privacy that I barely registered in my growing panic. I scrolled forward, looking for anything unusual. Most entries were work meetings, gym sessions, or date nights. Then I saw it. Scheduled for Saturday, 2 days from now. Henry Coffee, 3 p.m., Saturday. My soul felt like it had left my body. They were meeting. Dennis was meeting with his ex, the person he'd apparently never forgotten, and he hadn't said a single word to me about it. I checked the date again, confirmed it was this coming Saturday, not some past appointment. My hands curled into fists on the desk. How long had they been back in contact? When had Henry returned? And why was Dennis hiding it from me? The bracelet suddenly made terrible sense. It was a gift for their reunion, or maybe a parting gift. Was Dennis planning to end things with me? Had our entire relationship been nothing but a placeholder until Henry came back into his life? I heard the echo of Dennis's voice in my head from this morning. Love you, see you tonight. He'd kissed me goodbye like everything was normal, like he wasn't secretly planning to meet his ex-boyfriend in 2 days. The betrayal of it cut deeper than I'd expected. Not because he was meeting Henry necessarily, but because he'd lied. Through omission, through silence, through keeping secrets he'd lied. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet house, feeling the walls close in around me. Everything I'd believed about us, about Dennis, about our future together, it all felt shaky now. Built on foundations that might not be as solid as I'd thought. 3 years we'd been together. 3 years of building a life, making plans, talking about marriage eventually. And apparently none of it had been enough to earn his honesty about this. I thought about confronting him immediately, demanding explanations as soon as he walked through the door tonight. But something held me back. Maybe I needed more information. Maybe I needed to see this meeting for myself before jumping to conclusions. After all, there could be a reasonable explanation. Henry could be visiting for work. The coffee meeting could be innocent closure. The bracelet could be— No, I couldn't lie to myself like that. Innocent explanations didn't require secrecy. If there was nothing to hide, Dennis would have mentioned it. Hey, my ex is in town. We're grabbing coffee to catch up. Simple, honest. The kind of thing partners tell each other. But he hadn't told me, and that silence spoke volumes. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, mechanically going through my work tasks without really processing them. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from Dennis, a funny meme asking what I wanted for dinner, saying he couldn't wait to see me, I felt a strange disconnect. Who was this person texting me? The man I thought I knew? Or someone wearing his face while his heart belonged to someone else? By the time Dennis came home that evening, I'd made a decision. I would go to that coffee shop on Saturday. I would see for myself what this meeting was about. Maybe it was cowardly, maybe it was an invasion of privacy, but I needed to know the truth before I could figure out what to do next. Dennis walked through the door with his usual smile, immediately pulling me into a hug. Missed you, he murmured against my hair, and I let him hold me even though every fiber of my being wanted to push him away and scream, "Who is Henry? Why are you lying to me?" Instead, I hugged him back and whispered, "Missed you too." Because sometimes the biggest lies are the ones we tell ourselves. Saturday morning arrived with a clarity that felt almost cruel. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind running through countless scenarios of what I might witness today. Dennis had been acting completely normal all week, laughing at our usual shows, cooking dinner together, making plans for next month's vacation. If he was nervous about seeing Henry again, he hid it perfectly. Or maybe I just didn't know him as well as I thought I did. Heading to the gym, he announced casually after breakfast, grabbing his workout bag from the closet, the same closet where that velvet box was still hidden. I wondered if he'd checked on it recently, if he'd held that bracelet and thought about giving it to Henry today. Should be back in a couple hours. I nodded, forcing a smile. Have a good workout. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, I grabbed my keys and a baseball cap. My hands were steady now, adrenaline overriding the fear that had kept me paralyzed all week. I knew where he was really going. I'd memorized the name of the coffee shop from his calendar, looked up its location, planned my route. This was happening. After today, there would be no more questions, no more uncertainty, just truth. Whatever form it took, I followed at a safe distance, my stomach churning with a mixture of dread and determination. Dennis didn't go anywhere near the gym. Instead, he drove toward the downtown area, to a small independent coffee shop called the Grindstone. It was the kind of place couples went for intimate conversations, with its dim lighting and secluded corner tables. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I parked half a block away and watched through my windshield as Dennis got out of his car, straightened his shirt, ran his fingers through his hair. He looked nervous. Actually nervous. In 3 years together, I'd seen Dennis handle job interviews, family drama, even a minor car accident with calm composure. But right now, preparing to meet Henry, his hands were fidgeting and his shoulders were tense. Then I saw him. Henry Crawford was waiting outside the coffee shop. And my heart sank. He was tall, taller than me, with that effortlessly attractive look some people just have. Dark brown hair styled perfectly, strong jawline, wearing clothes that suggested he cared about his appearance without trying too hard. He looked like someone from a cologne advertisement. And when Dennis approached him, the way Henry's face lit up made my chest constrict painfully. They greeted each other with a hug that lasted a beat too long. Then they disappeared inside. I sat there for several minutes, trying to breathe normally, trying to think rationally. This wasn't proof of anything yet. Ex-boyfriends could be friends. People could hug without it meaning anything. But even as I tried to convince myself of these things, I knew I couldn't just sit in my car wondering. I needed to see their interaction for myself. I pulled the cap lower over my face and walked toward the grindstone, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Through the large front windows I could see them sitting at a corner table. Henry was talking animatedly, his hands gesturing as he told some story. And Dennis, Dennis was laughing. Really laughing. The kind of full, genuine laugh I'd thought was reserved for moments with me. His whole face was bright with joy. His eyes crinkled at the corners, completely absorbed in whatever Henry was saying. Something inside me cracked watching that moment. Because I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd made Dennis laugh like that. When had we stopped being that source of joy for each other? When had our relationship become comfortable instead of exciting, routine instead of spontaneous? My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me out of my spiral. A text from my best friend asking about lunch tomorrow. I didn't respond, couldn't focus on anything except the scene in front of me. Henry reached across the table and touched Dennis's hand, just briefly, and Dennis didn't pull away. They were sitting close, leaning toward each other, existing in their own private bubble where the rest of the world, including me, didn't matter. I couldn't take it anymore. Before I could talk myself out of it, before rational thought could stop me, I pushed open the door to the grindstone and walked inside. The little bell above the door chimed, and several people looked up, including Dennis. The color drained from his face so fast I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Henry turned to see what had caused Dennis's reaction, confusion written across his handsome features. I stood there, my cap still pulled low but not low enough to hide who I was. For a moment nobody moved. The entire coffee shop seemed to hold its breath. Then Dennis stood up so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Lonnie," his voice came out strangled, panicked. This isn't what it looks like." I'd imagined 1,000 responses to that inevitable sentence. But now that the moment was here, I found I had no words. My throat was tight, my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of them. Henry started to stand too. I should probably stay. My voice cut through the awkward tension, sharper than I'd intended. I looked directly at Henry for the first time, this stranger who had somehow become central to my unraveling relationship. "You're going to stay because I want to know exactly who you are and why my boyfriend is here with you instead of at the gym where he said he'd be." The silence that followed was suffocating. Other customers were definitely staring now, but I didn't care. I was tired of being the one in the dark, tired of secrets and lies and hidden jewelry boxes. Dennis found his voice first, though it trembled. "Henry is. I know who he is." I interrupted. "I found your messages. I found the bracelet." I watched Dennis's eyes widen in shock, then guilt. "What I don't know is why you're here. Why you've been lying to me. Why there's an expensive gift hidden in our closet with his name on it." Henry looked between us, clearly uncomfortable but rooted to his spot. "I didn't know you were in a relationship," he said quietly to Dennis. "You told me you were single when you reached out last month." Last month. They'd been talking for a month. While Dennis was kissing me goodnight, making love to me, planning our future, he'd been reconnecting with Henry behind my back. The betrayal was so complete, so overwhelming, that for a second I couldn't breathe. Dennis's face crumbled. Lonnie, please, let me explain. Explain what? That I've been living a lie? That while I've been planning our future, you've been... I couldn't finish the sentence. Finally, Dennis spoke the truth I'd been dreading. Henry was my first love. The person I thought I'd spend my life with. And just like that, everything made terrible, perfect sense. I stood frozen in place, my entire body rigid with the weight of what Dennis had just admitted. The confession hung in the air between us like smoke, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Henry was his first love. The words echoed in my head, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. Around us, the coffee shop had gone quiet, other patrons pretending not to watch while clearly absorbed in our drama. Dennis's face was a portrait of guilt, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Henry kept his gaze fixed on the table as if studying the wood grain could somehow make him invisible. I forced myself to speak, though my voice came out raw and shaking. So what am I then? Your backup plan, the person you settled for because you couldn't have him? No. Dennis reached toward me instinctively, but I stepped back, putting more distance between us. His hand dropped to his side. Lonnie, you're completely different. What we had... Stop. I held up my hand, unable to bear hearing whatever justification he was about to offer. Just stop talking in circles and give me the truth. Why was that bracelet hidden in our closet? Why are you here with him today? And why did I have to find out about all of this by snooping through your things like some paranoid stranger? Dennis drew in a shaky breath, and when he finally spoke, each word seemed to cost him something. Because I never fully let him go. The honesty of it was worse than any lie could have been. I felt my knees weaken and I gripped the back of a nearby chair to steady myself. Henry finally looked up, his expression pained. We ended things 4 years ago, Dennis. You told me you'd moved forward with your life. That you were happy. I tried to be. Dennis's voice cracked and tears began streaming down his face. I genuinely tried, Henry. Being with Lonnie made me happy. Makes me happy. But when you sent that message last month saying you were moving back to the city, he trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Last month, they'd been in contact for an entire month, and I'd noticed nothing. While I was planning our anniversary dinner, while I was researching engagement rings during my lunch breaks, Dennis had been secretly rebuilding a connection with his ex. So I really was just filling a space, I said, my voice hollow. A convenient placeholder until something better came along. That's not fair. Dennis took a step toward me, his hands outstretched in supplication. What I feel for you is real. I love you, Lonnie. I genuinely love you, but not as much as you love him. I wasn't asking a question. The truth was written all over his face, in the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes, in the tremor of his hands, in the fact that we were even having this conversation at all. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Henry spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I came here thinking we were just going to talk about old times. Dennis reached out saying he wanted closure after all these years. I had no idea he was in a serious relationship. If I had known, he looked at me directly for the first time. I would never have agreed to meet. Closure. I repeated the word, tasting its bitterness. Is that what you call it when you buy expensive jewelry for someone? I turned my attention back to Dennis. That bracelet with the emeralds. What was it really for? Don't lie to me anymore. I think I've earned at least that much. Dennis closed his eyes, and more tears tracked down his cheeks. When he opened them again, they were filled with a defeated kind of honesty. I bought it 3 weeks ago. I was going to give it to Henry today as a goodbye gift, because I needed to make a choice between you two. And I thought if I could just see him one more time, talk to him, give him something meaningful, I could finally close that chapter and commit fully to you. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they destroyed me. You had to choose? My voice rose, attracting more attention from the other customers. After 3 years together, you had to actively choose whether to stay with me. I was an option to be weighed and measured? It's not like that. Then what is it like, Dennis? I demanded. Explain to me how any of this is okay. Explain how you thought it was acceptable to string me along while you figured out your feelings for someone else. Explain why I had to discover all of this instead of you having the decency to be honest with me. Dennis opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no answer because there was no good answer. Nothing he could say would make this better, would rewind time to before I found that box, before I learned his secrets, before I realized our entire relationship had been built on a foundation of unresolved feelings for another man. Henry stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I should leave. This is between you two. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, caught in a situation he claimed he hadn't understood. But I wasn't ready to let him go. Not yet. Did you know? I asked him directly. When he contacted you last month, did you have any suspicion he was with someone? Henry met my gaze steadily. No. He said he'd been thinking about our past, about how things ended, and that he wanted to talk. I thought it was just two people who used to care about each other finding closure. I'm in town for a job transfer, and I figured meeting once wouldn't hurt anything. He paused, then added quietly, for what it's worth, I'm sorry you're caught up in this. You didn't deserve to be blindsided. The apology felt genuine, and somehow that made everything worse. Henry wasn't a villain. Dennis wasn't a villain. They were just two people with unfinished history, and I was the collateral damage of their inability to properly end things years ago. I looked at Dennis one final time, memorizing his face, the face I'd kissed goodnight countless times. The face I'd imagined growing old alongside. That bracelet, I said, my voice steadier now. You were going to give it to him today to say goodbye so you could choose me. Is that right? Dennis nodded miserably. Yes, but you had to meet him first. You had to see him, spend time with him, give him an expensive gift before you could decide if I was enough. I let the words settle. That tells me everything I need to know about where I actually stand in your heart. Lonnie? Please, I'm done here. I turned toward the door, my vision blurring with tears I refused to shed in front of them. Enjoy your reunion or your closure or whatever this is. I'm not going to stand in your way anymore. As I pushed through the coffee shop door, I heard Dennis call my name one more time, his voice breaking on the syllables. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back, because some truths, once spoken, can't be unheard. And some betrayals, no matter how they're justified, can't be forgiven. The drive home passed in a blur of tears and traffic lights that seemed to take forever to change. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I focused on the physical sensation to keep myself from completely falling apart. The radio played some upbeat pop song that felt obscenely cheerful given the circumstances, so I switched it off, preferring the silence broken only by my ragged breathing. When I pulled into our driveway, no, Dennis's driveway, I corrected myself. I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the house we'd shared for 2 years. It looked the same as it had this morning when I'd left to follow Dennis, but everything felt irrevocably changed. The blue paint we'd debated over, the garden I'd spent weekends cultivating, the porch swing we'd installed together last spring. All of it was tainted now with the knowledge that Dennis had been mentally somewhere else, with someone else while we built this life. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. Dennis calling over and over, each call going to voicemail when I declined it. Text messages poured in too, visible on my lock screen. Lonnie, please just let me explain. I'm coming home, we need to talk. Don't do anything rash, please. I love you. I'm so sorry. I silenced the phone and shoved it deep into my jacket pocket. There was nothing left to explain. No conversation that could fix what had been broken. Some lines, once crossed, destroyed everything that came before them. Inside the house, I went straight to our bedroom. My former bedroom, I reminded myself, and pulled my largest suitcase from the closet. The same closet where that damned bracelet was still hidden. I grabbed clothes mechanically, not really paying attention to what I was packing. Jeans, shirts, underwear, socks. My hands moved on autopilot while my mind spun with fragments of memories. Dennis laughing at my terrible jokes. Dennis making breakfast on Sunday mornings. Dennis holding me during thunderstorms because he knew I hated them. Had any of it been real? Or had I been living in a carefully constructed illusion while Dennis pined for someone else? The sound of the front door opening made me freeze. Dennis's footsteps echoed through the house, quick and purposeful. Lonnie? His voice was thick with emotion. Baby, where are you? I didn't answer, just continued packing. A moment later he appeared in the doorway, and the sight of him made my chest tighten. His eyes were swollen from crying, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it, a nervous habit I'd always found endearing. Now it just made me angry that I still noticed, still cared. What are you doing? He asked, though the answer was obvious. Leaving. I didn't look at him, couldn't look at him. What does it look like? Lonnie, please don't do this. He moved into the room and I held up a hand to stop him. Don't come any closer. My voice was sharp enough that he actually stopped. I mean it, Dennis. Stay over there. We need to talk about what happened. There's nothing to talk about. The words exploded out of me, 3 years of trust and love curdling into rage. You've been emotionally cheating on me for a month. You bought jewelry for your ex. You were ready to end our relationship depending on how a coffee date went. What part of that requires discussion? Dennis's face crumpled. I wasn't going to end things. I was trying to find closure so I could be fully present with you. By keeping secrets? By lying about where you were going? By hiding expensive gifts in our shared closet? I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. That's not how you build a future with someone, Dennis. That's how you betray them. I know. His voice broke. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please, Lonnie, I love you. Whatever you think about today, about Henry, that doesn't change the fact that I love you and want to be with you. I finally looked at him directly, and he flinched at whatever he saw in my expression. Love isn't just words. It's actions. It's choices. And your choices have been crystal clear. Your heart is still with Henry, whether you want to admit it or not. That's not true. Yes, it is. I zipped the suitcase closed with more force than necessary. If you really wanted to be with me, if you were really over him, you wouldn't have needed to see him again. You wouldn't have bought him that bracelet. You wouldn't have lied to me for weeks. I grabbed my bag and faced him. The Dennis I thought I knew would have been honest. Would have said, hey, my ex contacted me and I have some unresolved feelings I need to work through. That Dennis would have respected me enough to include me in that process instead of sneaking around behind my back. I was afraid. The admission came out small and broken. I was afraid of losing you. Afraid you'd think exactly what you're thinking now, that you were never enough. And yet your fear of losing me didn't stop you from doing the exact things that guaranteed it would happen. I moved toward the door and he stepped aside to let me pass. In the hallway, I paused and turned back one last time. You want to know what the worst part is? It's not that you had feelings for Henry. People can't always control their emotions. The worst part is that you made me into someone I'm not. Someone who checks their partner's phone, who follows them to secret meetings, who lives in constant doubt. I hate what I became because of your dishonesty. Dennis reached out as if to touch me, then let his hand drop. If you leave now, what happens to us? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications and consequences. I thought about all the futures we'd imagined together, the wedding we'd vaguely discussed, the house we wanted to buy, the possibility of kids someday. All of it felt like fairy tales now, stories I'd told myself while ignoring the truth. There is no us anymore, I said quietly. There's just you and your unresolved feelings for Henry. And there's me, finally choosing myself for once. I headed toward the front door, my suitcase wheels clicking on the hardwood floor. Figure out what you really want, Dennis. Who you really want, but don't expect me to wait around while you decide if I'm worth choosing. Lonnie. Goodbye, Dennis. I walked out into the fading afternoon light, loaded my suitcase into the car and drove away from the house, the relationship and the man I thought I'd spend my life with. In my rearview mirror, I could see Dennis standing in the doorway, watching me leave. And for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like I could breathe. 2 weeks crawled by with excruciating slowness. I'd moved into a small studio apartment on the other side of town, barely furnished, with a mattress on the floor, a folding chair and a lamp I'd bought at a discount store. It wasn't much, but it was mine, untainted by memories of Dennis and our life together. The space felt empty in more ways than one, echoing with silence that I tried to fill with podcasts and background music that never quite worked. Dennis had texted constantly for the first few days. Apologies, explanations, pleas for another chance. Then the messages had gradually slowed and finally stopped altogether 3 days ago. I told myself I was relieved, that this silence meant he'd finally accepted our ending and moved on. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I wondered if that moving on included Henry. The thought drove splinters of pain through my chest every time. On the 14th night after I'd walked out, I was standing on my tiny balcony, watching the city lights blur through unshed tears, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me accept the call. Hello, Lonnie. Henry's voice was the last thing I'd expected to hear. My entire body went rigid. I know this is strange, but I need to talk to you. It's important. Please. My first instinct was to hang up. What could Henry possibly have to say to me? But curiosity, or maybe masochism, kept me on the line. What could we possibly have to discuss? Everything that happened was partially my fault, he said, speaking quickly as if afraid I'd disconnect. And there are things you need to know. Things Dennis should have told you but probably didn't. Can I come see you? Just for 10 minutes. I promise I'll leave the second you ask me to. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was a terrible idea, but I found myself giving him my address anyway, then spending the next 20 minutes pacing my small apartment, wondering what I'd just agreed to and why. When Henry knocked on my door, I almost didn't open it. But I'd committed to this conversation, however ill-advised. He stood in the hallway looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, wearing jeans and a wrinkled shirt that suggested he'd dressed in a hurry. Nothing like the polished man I'd seen at the coffee shop. Come in, I said, my voice carefully neutral. He entered but didn't sit, didn't try to get comfortable. He stood near the door as if ready to flee at any moment. Dennis chose you, he said abruptly, without preamble. That bracelet he bought? He never gave it to me. After you left the coffee shop, he told me that being with you was the best thing that ever happened to him. That what we had was the past. And he wanted a future with you. The words should have meant something. Should have felt like vindication or victory. Instead, they just felt hollow. Then why are you here telling me this? Why isn't Dennis the one at my door? Henry ran a hand through his hair, a gesture eerily similar to Dennis's nervous habit. Because he's terrified. He thinks he's destroyed any chance he had with you. And he's probably right, but I couldn't let things end without you knowing the truth. That you weren't a second choice or a consolation prize. You changed him in ways I never could. How convenient that you're here defending him, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Clearing your conscience by playing messenger? That's fair. He accepted the accusation without argument. I am trying to clear my conscience. Because I should have asked more questions when Dennis reached out. I should have suspected he was with someone. And I'm sorry I didn't. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But I'm also here because what I told you is true. When we talked after you left, Dennis was completely broken. He said that losing you made him realize what actually mattered. Funny how people always have these revelations after they've already caused the damage, I said. The anger felt good. Cleaner than the sadness that had consumed me for 2 weeks. You're right. Henry moved slightly. Not closer, just shifting his weight. And you have every right to never forgive him. Every right to move on and find someone who won't make you doubt yourself. But I also think, he hesitated as if unsure whether to continue. I think you should know that he's downstairs right now. In your parking lot. He's been sitting in his car for 2 hours trying to work up the courage to come knock on your door. My heart stuttered in my chest. He's here? He didn't know I was coming. I decided on my own to talk to you first because I thought maybe hearing it from me, someone who has no stake in your decision, might mean more. Henry took a step toward the door. I'm leaving town next week, taking the job I came here for but in a different city. Dennis and I said our actual goodbyes yesterday. Real closure this time, so you don't have to worry about me being a factor in whatever you choose to do. I walked to the window and looked down at the parking lot. Sure enough, Dennis's car was there, parked under a streetlight. I could see him sitting in the driver's seat, head bowed, shoulders hunched in a posture of defeat that I'd never seen from him before. What do I do with this? I asked, not really expecting an answer. How do I trust someone who lied to me, who made me doubt everything about our relationship? Henry joined me at the window, careful to maintain distance. I can't answer that, but I can tell you what I see. I see someone who made terrible choices out of fear and confusion. Someone who never stopped loving you even when he was stupidly trying to resolve feelings for me. And I see someone who, if you give him another chance, will probably spend the rest of his life trying to make this up to you. He headed toward the door. But more importantly, I see you someone who knows their worth and isn't afraid to walk away when they're not being treated right. Don't forget that part. Whatever you decide. He left and I stood alone in my apartment staring down at Dennis's car. My hand was on the doorknob before I realized I'd moved. The question echoed in my mind, impossible to silence. Could I take that risk again? Could I walk down those stairs, get in that car and try to rebuild something from the ruins of broken trust? Or was it finally time to close this chapter and start writing a new one where I was the protagonist instead of someone waiting to be chosen? My fingers tightened on the doorknob. Dennis was still sitting in his car, waiting. The decision was entirely mine, and for the first time in weeks I had absolutely no idea what to do.